And now, two guys who once survived crashing a party in the Hamptons, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 47 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, Jonathan and I sharpen our tools. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
And you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Today's show is sponsored by Cat's Coffee. If you're looking for truly exceptional coffee to help you survive the morning or the next zombie apocalypse, you need to be drinking Cat's. They specialize in the finest coffee from sources that prioritize environmental responsibility and are fair trade certified. Their goal is to achieve perfection in every cup. Check them out at Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com, or click on their bright green banner on the site and make sure you're dealing with an official sponsor of the show. Again, that's Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com.
Today we took a class on knife sharpening given by Bob Kramer, who is a certified master bladesmith by the American Bladesmith Society. It was a fantastic class. We covered a few topics that we'd like to share with all of you. And we've added a few topics as well just to expand on the topic of knives. We said we would do this for everybody. This was actually in both of our survival chi plans to go out and learn more about knives, learn to sharpen knives, and even specifically to take this class. So we've gotten on it and we took the class. For those of you Googling it right now, yep, Bob Kramer is actually world renowned for making kitchen knives. But again, he's a master bladesmith, so the man can make anything. And if you think about it, the kitchen knife is the tool most of us use every day. If not you, then someone in your household is using it very regularly. It's a great knife to think about when you're thinking in terms of regular use, regular care, and sharpening. And this was a knife sharpening class, so really focusing on the kitchen knife was fantastic. I think we both walked away with a much greater appreciation for the care and maintenance of knives, which, again, commonly used tools. So you want to maintain it, care for it, keep it up.
And I think that's a good time to kind of jump in and bring up why are knives so important. And in the context of an urban environment, we've certainly ranted about it in the past, about that there's a societal issue around the idea of that knives have become viewed solely as a weapon, and they're not. I mean, all weapons are tools. Not all tools are weapons,
although most of them could probably be used that way.
Oh, absolutely. And probably have at one point in history or another. But the point is that a knife is a weapon. There are knives that are specifically designed to be weapons, but most knives are not actually designed to be weapons. Most knives are designed to carve wood, cut food, cut rope.
Yeah, they're designed around a utility, and by that I don't mean a utility knife. I mean they're designed around a function. So whether it be a cooking knife, and even, we saw today, I think Aaron and I both saw more types of cooking knives or heard about more types of cooking knives than we probably ever wanted to know about or thought about.
Or cared about.
But even in that arena, we went through, a sushi chef is going to have a whole bunch of different types of knives for a job, for different jobs. On the other hand, a home chef could probably get away with, one chef's knife and maybe a paring knife or something like that. Mm-hmm. So even within the realm of a task, you might have knives that are good for certain forms of it. You're not going to want to use your fine chef's knife for chopping through bone and butchering an entire cow.
No.
On the other hand, you're not going to want to use a cleaver to do some fine fillet work.
Although I guess if you were really exceptional with a cleaver, you could.
That's true.
And that brings up another interesting point about that knives are not, and this is one of the things that I talked about with Phil Rose, is that, first of all, there is no such thing as a perfect all-purpose knife. Right. There is no knife that will do everything perfect. There is a user that can do many things very well, potentially, with one style of knife. But that's not the way knives are designed. Each knife, every tip shape, every blade geometry, every thickness, they all serve very different, very unique functions that allow the user to do a task most efficiently or most safely in some instances. And so, I think that's most people, their understanding of a knife, especially in the context of an urban show, since
Right.
that's what we talk about, that within the context of that, most of us never take the time to really learn about and understand the different blade shapes and tips and everything else that goes into it. You know, we think, oh, well, stainless steel or carbon steel, and that's about the limit of where we go with things. Or
If we even go that far.
If we even go that far, most people are just like, I don't know, whatever.
I think most people get the furthest they end up getting on these things is, I need a kitchen knife, or I need my camping knife, or maybe my pocket knife.
Yeah,
That's
I think to go back to the importance of it, if you think about edged tools, which is what a knife is, is in many ways, I think, what launched society for human beings forward. I mean, it was the most important tool outside of developing a brain and fire for humanity. I mean, it was what allowed us to start creating and making things.
Right. It's probably the second most important tool you can have in your day-to-day carry.
Oh, yeah.
Or, in a survival situation. A knife can get you out of a seatbelt. A knife can prepare you a meal.
Mm-hmm.
A knife can even perform surgery if needed, if you actually get that far into a survival situation.
Yeah.
So, when you think about it, but again, to Aaron's point, there is not necessarily a perfect knife that does everything well. By definition, that's not possible. So, when you have a kitchen knife, you want a good kitchen knife. You want a really great kitchen knife, potentially. But at the end of the day, you're looking for either a chef's knife or a paring knife or something like that. If you want a hunting knife, go get yourself a good hunting knife, something that can be used as a skinner. You're going to want to do some research there, really take a look at it and see, what type of edge geometry you want, what type of grip you want, the handle. Bob Kramer mentioned today that he has all kinds of handle geometries he uses, and sometimes he even uses ones that weren't for the intended purpose because it just feels better in the hand for what he wants to do with it. He'll end up mixing and matching things. He even took, I think he said he took at one point a left-handed handle and used it for a right-handed knife because it just felt better for the function he wanted to use it for. That's not to say that it would have worked great for some other function.
No, or for another person, but for him
exactly.
in his hands, whatever the task was he was doing, it worked out very well.
Right, or the Phil Rose knives that you took a look at. They have a very specific function.
Very specific. Their blade geometry is meant for very specific things. But even then, when Phil and I were talking about it, and I asked, why did you... Because he picked... His blade shapes for the knife in particular I was interviewing him about were a modification, since they were not a true spear point. Because a true spear point is basically like a dagger. It's perfectly symmetrical. Both sides are sharpened, but a modified, what has become called a modified spear point, is just where the tip of the blade is perfectly centered on the blade, but only one side is sharpened. And for his purposes and what he was doing, it was, and what the knife was intended for, it's a very good, it's an exceptional geometry for it. But there's also, when we were talking about it, the point was that he was like, well, it's really up to the end user. It's what they're comfortable with. Some people really like drop point knives where the tip is just slightly or sometimes a little more than slightly dropped down below the spine of the knife.
Right. And, one of the reasons we're bringing this up now, too, we did I think it was not last week, but the week before, we did a show around the holiday season and gift giving and all that.
Kind of afraid where this is going.
Well, no, there's two directions I can take with this. I'm going to stay within both of them, not the ones you're thinking. So, on one side, I have actually found that in the last week, the number of times my pocket knife has had to come out has increased dramatically. So in the average day, I actually will touch 2 different knives on an average day, because I do usually help prepare dinner when I get home. at which point I'm holding a kitchen knife of some kind. And then throughout the day, lately, I've been getting a lot of boxes, both at work, and I've found that, now that gift-giving time is coming, things I'm ordering for other people or things that are coming to us, a lot of Amazon boxes to open. But it makes me think more and more about these things, and I'm hoping that by going over these topics with all of you, as you think about a gift for a loved one who maybe is into hunting or fishing or general camping, or maybe that budding chef out there who needs a good chef's knife, some of the things we're going to talk to you about this week are going to ring true, and you're going to go, okay, I can't go get just some general purpose knife because this guy needs a knife. I need to know why I'm buying them a knife.
Yeah, you really do, because you could. I mean, this goes back to you could, but you wouldn't take a chef's knife out hunting,
right?
Because it's the wrong knife for the job.
Although I will say, having watched the videos on the Kramer website,
well, you can hunt with one of his knives, but that's different. That's a totally different style of knife,
right.
And that actually brings up, and I think that illustrates a point. There is a difference between, and I guess to illustrate the point, when we say survival knife, that can mean a whole lot of different things, which we are, obviously, we're a survival show, so we're going to come back and spend some real time on that topic by itself of what is a survival knife. But there's, when we talk about hunting knives, there can be real differences. For instance, Jason McConnell, the Redneck Resource, was looking for a knife, and he had very specific needs. It was the blade length needed to be 9 inches, and the geometry and overall it needed to be very good for piercing and stabbing, because he was it was hog hunting, but it was like hand-to-hand combat with wild hogs.
I think he was dropping out of trees.
That's awesome. I have this weird Inspector Clouseau image in my head now of Jason McConnell as Kato.
Right, and a lot of you, when you're thinking about hunting knives, just take it back to the knife discussion, because that could go somewhere totally wrong. But in that knife discussion, a lot of hunters think in terms of skinners when they think of hunting knives.
And that's kind of where I was going with it, is that most people, when they think of a hunting knife, it's a general purpose knife, but it's really built for skinning and skinning an animal. And not even really, you can butcher, again, you can do it, but you can butcher an animal with it, but that's not the design of a hunting knife.
Right.
Butcher an animal.
Some people see a large knife and they immediately think, oh, that must be a hunting knife or a survival knife. Lots of times these days, there's a lot of custom knife makers for some reason, and I can't explain the trend, but there's a lot of fighting knives out there.
Oh, I can explain the trend.
It's the tactical
trend. It's the tactical
yeah.
trend.
But from a survival point of view, and I know from, both of us kind of make fun of a lot of that, not to say that I probably own a fighting knife. I'm not proud of it.
I know
but,
you do.
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen it.
Shh, don't tell people. But it's a beautiful knife. But in all honesty, I know there is no reason in the world for me to ever take it out. It's pretty, and they actually did a really nice job making it.
Yeah, I mean, it's that knife is if it's the one I'm thinking of, that is a work of art, because that was a custom knife.
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you, if the zombie apocalypse ever comes, that's what I'm using to take zombie heads. Hey. But knowing that is a very unlikely scenario.
Not impossible, just unlikely.
Unlikely scenario. That knife is probably just going to sit in my safe. Every now and then I take it out to ogle it, and then I put it back in the safe, and that's the end of that for the year. On the other hand, I've got some very useful knives. Like, I've got a great camping knife. It could be called a survival knife. It's just my Rat 3. Yeah. It's a great all-purpose knife, and again, I said there's no such thing. It's a very good knife at a lot of things. It's not the best knife at any of them. So, in all honesty, it is not going to be the best knife for preparing food. It's not the best knife for hacking through the woods. It's not the best knife for a lot of things. But it's a good knife that will handle all of those tasks well enough when I'm out camping.
It is well, it's not. They're not called Rat. They changed their name to
ESEE.
ESEE, which does stand for something, and I'm not going to try to remember what all it stood for. But I was speaking to a listener recently about that, and he was asking for advice on choosing his first survival knife, and that was one of the ones that we talked about. And I said, well, And that was kind of the same conversation with him, is knives are kind of difficult to talk about, especially within the concept of, an hour-long show. We can't cover everything, and we can't cover everything in enough detail to really, so that you walk away from the show knowing how to pick a knife for every single occasion. And that's not the point of this show. The point of this episode is really to kind of bring up the topic of knives and have a kind of a general overview of it. But the ESEE, we'll go back to rat because that's easier to say. I don't care if they change the name or not.
And I actually have mine is not an ESE. Mine's a rat 3, which is a 3-inch blade on a very it's a well-made knife. But actually, having seen what the Phil Rose looks like, if I were picking it now, although the price difference is dramatic, I might still go with the rat. But the Phil Rose is a lot nicer looking. Then again, these are, in my mind, utility knives. These are knives you take out because they'll do well enough at a bunch of tasks, and you can't carry around an entire collection of knives when you're out camping.
Well, you could. Just, your
backpack gets heavy, and that's a lot of extra things to potentially lose.
Park ranger may wonder,
right?
Are you filming a Dexter show?
Right. There's people thinking, is this Dexter? Yeah. Who's he going to kill? All of a sudden, Homeland Security's knocking at the front of your tent. And nothing good comes of that. Nothing.
Unless they're wearing a bear costume, and then it's just funny. But that's a different story for another day. But I think the rats are great. I have a rat 3 also. Right. I also have a rat 4, and I like them both. And I even have the great big one that they made, which was the Jungleus. I know I'm not pronouncing that right for the one person listening to the show that knows the proper way to pronounce that. But that one's like a great big, what is it, like a chopper? It's like an 11-inch chopper or something. And that's a very heavy knife. It's like a mini machete, which is mostly its intended purpose. But we can get into all these different things. And I guess I'm really talking about right here and now about the idea of a survival knife really is the best time to talk about it, which is, I think and we can blame it on Hollywood, and we can blame it on marketing, which is a large part of the tactical. We're guys. We like black, and we like dangerous looking and Hollywood looking stuff. But it's unnecessary, and I think probably one of the worst survival. And I know there's the one guy out there that's like, no, I love mine. It's the greatest thing ever. But who is it? Randall? Was it Randall Davis who made the Rambo knife, the original Rambo knife? But if I say Rambo knife, everybody knows what I'm talking about. Right. And it's a horrible knife. I don't usually say that, but it's not a useful horrible knife. It's too big.
Right.
It's got all kinds of gimmicky junk on it. It's the whole thing with the handle having stuff stuffed in it is, there's pros and cons for it. But anyway, it's not a, I think when we talk about survival knives, and it goes back to Tactical Cool, is most of the time these days when you say survival knife, what people are actually picturing in their mind is a fighting knife.
Right.
It is not a bushcraft knife. Yep. It is not a practical knife. It is a knife. We were joking around earlier today about the movie Zorro, and its pointy end goes into the other guy, is really the intention of that knife.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. I got the Rat 3 same time you did, and this was years ago now.
Yeah.
If I were doing it again, and I say this with all honesty, if I were to do it now, right now I've got enough knives that I'm probably not buying any other ones anytime soon. Not in a Dexter kind of way, but just generally I've got a bunch of them. But if I were doing it right now and buying a real, if I were doing it right now and buying a real survival knife and calling it a survival knife and thinking of it that way, I personally would be buying and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, a Puko, which is really like it's a traditional Finnish belt knife. They have a nice handle to hold. Their blades aren't excessively long. They're really inexpensive. I mean, I think they range in price between $20 and $75.
There's some, of course, you can get into the custom world, and then you get into very expensive. But in general, they're very inexpensive knives.
And I'd get one probably carbon steel, just because a little easier to sharpen if you're out in the field. And you can put a nice fine edge on it, which we learned about today. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's what I would get. I wouldn't get anything tactical. I wouldn't get another rat. Not to say they're not great knives, and if you look at them, and you think it's the knife for you, it is a fantastic knife. Mine's held up really well.
Oh, yeah.
It's performed in all kinds of tasks. It's just not what I would get again. And I don't know about Aaron, but
I actually like mine, and I think I don't know if I'd say I would get it again or not. I mean, I like mine, and it's still my go-to camping knife for most persons. But the same problem is, I mean, like I was making fun of you a minute ago, and Jennifer makes fun of me all the time because on my dresser there are about 4 different knives that sit there, and that does not include the everyday pocket knife that I usually carry. And it's just those are my favorite go-to knives for different purposes. And one of them actually sits out, and that it just needs to be picked up because it is my tactical knife that really has it's not a knife I'm ever really going to use for anything, because that is a fighting knife, and it's the Kershaw Blur, specifically the Tonto, and there's a couple of nuances about it that make it a fighting knife and not a utilitarian knife. One of them being that it's a hollow ground knife, and we'll get into what hollow ground is in just a bit. But there are so many knives, and I don't know which. I know I would buy the Rat again because I do really like the knife. I don't like. I'll say this now: I don't like their edges.
Yeah,
I think they do a piss poor job of an edge. It is sharp when it comes to you in the sense that it'll shave hair off your arm, but it's not sharp in a proper sense.
Right.
It's a very what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of grungy edge that they've put on it. It's not a nice, fine, polished edge. And I know they seem to have a reason they think is legitimate for it. I don't buy that reason, and I don't agree with it. That it's, this is a utility knife. You don't want it to be, perfectly polished and everything. But and this goes back to the first class you took with Bob Kramer, which is, and I've heard it several times before and since, but I think he put it best, which is, the sharper the knife, the less effort it's going to take to do a task. And I've always known that the sharper the knife and the better the knife is going to maintain its edge, the less likely you are to hurt yourself with the knife, because you're not going to apply a whole bunch of pressure to do a task. And that's actually when you do end up cutting yourself, because the blade slips.
Yeah, he even talked about today. You could have different angles of sharpness.
Yeah.
But it's still about a finely finished edge.
Yeah.
I think that's the interesting part. But like I said, if I were thinking about a survival knife today or a general utility, it would be more along the lines of those Pucos.
And those are really cool.
The other one that you see a lot, low cost too. We talked about these earlier. The Moras.
These are exceptional knives. Are Moras,
and they are technically a type of Puco. Yeah, that's their design philosophy. They use those. And who is it who uses them?
Cody Lundeen.
Yeah, and for those of you who have seen, he's got a show also.
I mean, this is a guy that has his life and his passion and his business, his career is being a woodland survival. He specializes in desert survival,
right. And he carries this $20 knife. Yeah, and it's a fantastic knife. I mean, it's not the best knife in the world. It's a good utility knife.
Yeah, you're not going to impress people with it,
not at all,
unless we're talking about bushcraft, people that really are into bushcraft, and then you're going to impress them with the fact that you didn't go out and buy a really expensive knife that you don't actually know how to use.
Right, and I look at it a little. I look at the Moras, and I'm like, they're just not that pretty. And I've done the same thing with guns lately. I'm not into the tactical guns at all anymore. I mean, I own an AR. It's not something that I don't look at it and go, that's a beautiful weapon. I happen to like the 1911s. I love my Browning High Power, which has a deep blued finish and really nice grips on it. I think the same thing for knives should be true. The tools you have, and I think this is something that old craftsmen used to do too. So I mean, like even the guys who would make wood things, like guys who would carve, their tools in and of themselves would have a beauty to them. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something I like too. I want my tools to have a beauty to them as well. That you're carrying it, it's with you a lot, if not every day. So there should be some beauty to it, which is why I like some of the other Pucos with nice wood handles and things like that. But there is also value to be had for some of the synthetics out there. So, I can go either way on this one.
Yeah, and I think that's when I was talking to Phil Rose that I asked, why don't you do any woods? And he had a very good explanation, which is, I cannot get the consistency and durability out of wood that I know I can get with micarta or carbon fiber every single time. I'm always going to get a material that I know is not going to fall apart under pressure, which you can get with woods.
Right.
But there are some really beautiful outdoor survival knives that do have some amazing wood handles that would probably be just fine for most people. And they're like Barker River's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
They make some just gorgeous knives that you really could be proud to take out and show to your friends and stuff. And it's obvious that whoever made those knives really has a love of knives.
Mm-hmm.
And a love of what they do.
Right, and sometimes it's just for you too. It's not necessarily about showing it off. It's you should have pride in the tools you have.
Absolutely.
It's going to make you want to take more care of it.
Yeah. And
something like that, you want to make sure you take care of your knives. So talking about taking care of them a little, let's talk about the class a little bit more.
Yeah.
It really was a fantastic class. His whole philosophy is around using, I don't know if it's a philosophy so much, but he uses whetstones.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a great point about whetstones and stones and learning to sharpen on stones instead of sticks and all these other high-tech gadgets. It was really that no matter where in the world you are, you will be able to find stones to sharpen your knife. Even in a third world country, they have knives, they need to sharpen them, and they probably use stones. And most likely they're whetstones. Just because all you need to make a whetstone work properly is water. A little bit of water, and that whetstone functions perfectly. And I thought it was probably the first time I'd ever thought of it that way.
Yeah.
They're not heavy either, so you could probably pack a whetstone in a bag and carry it with you. I'm not suggesting you carry it in your everyday carry bag.
And not the great big stones.
And definitely not the great big ones that we were using in class.
But I think he also made an interesting point, and we both got kind of excited about when he said it. He started it off by saying it's a self-reliance thing.
Right.
I always know I'm going to be able to have this, even if the one that I have doesn't work out. Like you said, in the third world
self-reliance
area,
was great. It was the whole idea of, as the world moves more towards self-reliance, having a tool like a knife and knowing how to care for it yourself. I know a lot of people will take their knives to Williams-Sonoma or Sur La Table or wherever it is that's local to you that does knife sharpening. And he even said it, some of those people go once a year, usually before Thanksgiving to kick in the holiday season and get their knives sharpened. But it's nice to know when you don't have to do that. A lot of you listening probably do know how to sharpen your knives. I think both of us had a general idea of how to do it. We both knew how. It was more about perfecting it and making it so that you could restore any edge. And actually, that's one of the things. I walked away from the class. It was only a 2-hour class.
It was a 2-hour class.
I walked away from that class taking a knife that had actually been destroyed by somebody, that the edge had been completely removed. And I was able to restore that edge, and it was razor sharp. I rested it on the top of a ripe tomato, and it just fell through that tomato.
And that was the fun part about the class. The knives, the paring knives that we were given to use, and it was like, okay, now actually run the knife over, and everybody's like, oh, I don't want to do this, but you're literally just...
We removed the edge.
Yeah, we removed the edge from the knife. We flattened the edge of the knife
you
with
could
a
feel
grinder.
It was dull. When you felt that edge when you were done doing what you did to it, which was horrible, it's the kind of thing you look at and you go, I can't do that to a knife.
Yeah.
But when we were done, those knives were not just dull. They were edgeless, and we learned how to put an edge back on a knife. And so knowing how to do that is extremely useful, because if you are out hunting or fishing and you hit bone and you do take the edge off your... not having that tool functioning the way it should is just as bad as having a gun that has no bullets.
Yeah, or no firing pin.
Or no firing,
it's
whatever
pointless.
It is. And then all you've got is a piece of metal that you could poke things with. And, sure, if that's your thing.
It's entertaining.
It's entertaining. But I prefer my tools to function the way they're supposed to, and so the class was really good there. We learned about knife angles. So, for instance, he talked about on a kitchen knife, you really want to be between 10 and 15 degrees on each side, which gives you a 20-degree edge. Mm-hmm. He said that's pretty good for a chef's knife. For something like a knife where you're going to be coming in contact and chopping a lot, he actually said you could be at somewhere around 20 to 25 degrees
per side,
creating a 50-degree wedge, essentially. But you still want to put the sharpest edge you can on the end of that. And it's all about, it's not I think a lot of people think in terms of machetes, and they're not very sharp. Well, machete has a pretty wide angle on the front, but you should have a sharp. Your machete should still be
extremely sharp. But they should not be. They shouldn't have a very shallow angle.
Right. They should have a deeper angle.
Yeah,
or I guess a wider angle.
Wider angle because you're going to be doing more chopping. Right. And he brought that up in the class. Like, no, you would not use your chef's knife to start hacking at. And it was somebody that had taken one, and that broke my heart when I heard it, that somebody had taken one of his custom knives that are several thousands of dollars and takes apart. Takes, what is it, like a year-long wait or a 2 year?
Oh, if that. And I don't even know if you can get them anymore, basically. You can get into a lottery for them, and he has a few that go on to his auction site. But overall, he's actually taken all the orders he's going to take for the rest of his life, for all intents and purposes. He'll take a few more year after year, but he's pretty much done taking custom orders.
But somebody had taken one of his custom knives. And when you hear somebody say custom, and there are people that call knives customs that are not custom, but a true custom knife is where it was a real artisan that by hand made everything involved in the process.
Right, from the Damascus steel being folded to that artisan specifications and them doing it, to the handle design, to even carving out that handle.
Yeah.
He does all that, the heat treatment, the putting the edge on it, everything. And there's a lot. By the way, he's not the only master bladesmith around. There's other ones out there.
There's, what was it, like,
I think it's 100 in the U.S. Is that it?
I think it was under 100 in the U.S., and I think worldwide there's 150.
Don't hold us to any of those numbers, but the point is he's one of a very small group of people, and he's very talented. I mean, we actually got the chance to take a look at some of the custom pieces.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
And bear in mind, we're just excited about what we saw today. We're not in any way trying to convince you to go out and buy his knives versus someone else's. I'm a big fan of. I've actually got the Kershaw Shun kitchen knives. I do have one of Bob Kramer's, but not one of his customs. Henkel's makes great knives too. So does...
Hold on one second. Pull out your power cord because the dog's about to yank it. Come here, Bear. Okay.
So, there's a lot of knives out there that are very good. There's Japanese style versus the European style. Those are all decisions you have to personally make. One of the things I did find interesting is knives with bolsters towards the bottom. They make sharpening very difficult.
Yes, they do. Again, something else that came up in my conversation with Phil. I already knew the answer. I was kind of setting him up for it because he puts a choil in his knives, which is where he actually grinds out a half circle between the bolster and the blade,
right.
And it allows you to properly sharpen the knife.
Right.
I have, having grown up with a chef, have long since, and always had a love for knives. I think in my late teens really understood that there is a place for bolsters and there is a use for bolsters, but only by chefs that, because I think a lot of them will actually use the bolster to smash in and open cans. Yeah, but it's kind of a weird thing to do with a knife anyway. But the point is that they do make sharpening a pain in the butt.
Right, and I think a lot of chefs are moving away from a lot of that now, and since there's been a resurgence in the Japanese style knives that don't have bolsters on them. But again, you can go out there and take a look at what's available and see. And when you look at those bolsters, you'll immediately go, oh, I see why I can't get the knife all the way to the end. I mean, it makes perfect sense when you see it.
Mm-hmm.
Just makes sharpening and care more difficult, so it's something you should consider when you do it. Since, as I think we all know it, but we never think about it very much, a knife is a consumable. That was something that was pointed out to us today. Over time, you will wear away the edge, and you'll continue wearing it away until really you don't have a knife you can acceptably use. It could take you a very long time. It might take, and as he's pointed out, it might take 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, a lifetime. But at some point, that knife could be consumed because every time you go to sharpen it, it consumes some of the steel. But actually, he also pointed out the more you care for it, the less likely you are to have to remove mass amounts of steel. So that was also an interesting thing to hear, and it was a little counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you really think about the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
So all that was really neat. I highly recommend if you've got someone in your area who teaches the class, or he does national tours now. So if you have like a William Sonoma or Sir Latab in your area,
Was he doing it through Williams-Sonoma too?
I think he's just doing it through Sur La Table, but Williams-Sonoma also offers some classes with some other guys.
All right.
They're not Bob Kramer, and I've just come to like this guy. He's that cool, and like I said, check out his website and check out some of the videos, because I think those of us who are in the survival community or prep community can really appreciate some of the videos in the sense that we've all seen what these knives can do. But when you see a guy with a kitchen knife go chopping through, what was that, like 3-inch hemp rope?
Yeah. In one
limp 3-inch hemp rope in one chop, and doing it multiple times with the same knife just to prove that it's not dulling, it's just going through and through and through. That's pretty cool.
12 water bottles in a row.
Oh yeah, slice through 12 water bottles with a 12-inch chef's knife. Now that's a big chef's knife, but still, that's a lot of water bottles. An inch a bottle, I guess. But it was just an interesting class to take in the sense that I think we both got a much better feel and comfort level. The nice part about doing it with an expert, and also going to a class like this where you start out with a paring knife that's not yours, gives you this comfort level of being able to go, okay, I'm not going to destroy if you have a Phil Rose knife at home, I'm not going to destroy my $500 knife learning how to sharpen it. So one of the things I'd recommend if you don't have a class in your area is go out, buy yourself a whetstone. Something like a 250 1000 grit, if you had to do two. I think they actually make two-sided 250 800s and 250 1000s. And start with the dull up a knife, a cheap one. You can go to Target, buy a cheap knife, dull it up.
Take one of your old kitchen knives and do that. You're not, because we all have that old kitchen knife that we use for opening in boxes and stuff that's not really a kitchen knife anymore.
Dull it up. You can actually use the end of the whetstone, just basically file away the edge on it.
Use the end, don't use the top of the whetstone, because you actually will mar the whetstone.
Yeah, use the edge. And then, again, you hold the knife at between a 10 and a 15-degree angle, which he actually gave us a good trick for. A matchbook, like the old-style matchbooks that have the angle to them, that's about 10 to 15 degrees. So if you used that as your guide for what visually it should be, if it's a smaller knife, 2 pennies. That's about the right height. So if you did that and kind of guided it through, you have to actually use a lot more pressure than you'd think you did. 5 pounds of pressure is about what you need to be using to do this. And if you have a home scale, put the blade on the scale and push and just see what it's like. Not the edge down, just the side of the side of the blade, and push down. 5 pounds of pressure is probably more than you think it is.
Yeah, I was really quite surprised.
Yeah, when I first pushed down, I was only pushing down with a pound. And I hadn't even thought, I was like, oh, that must be 5 pounds. I'm I'm watching it stabilize, and it goes to a pound. I'm thinking, all right. And then I push to 5, and it doesn't feel like a lot once you're there, but it's a lot. It's 5 times what I thought it was. So again, you have a pretty good idea of what 5 pounds is when you visualize it, but it's not often that you're pushing down on something with 5 pounds of pressure.
No, that is actually more pressure, a lot more pressure than you think it is.
So I would recommend trying that out, doing it. There's videos online. There's a lot of good videos. One of the things he also pointed out to us is there's a lot of myths.
There are a lot of myths, and once he went through and explained them, it was very obvious. And I mean, I'd heard the disproof of those myths before, but when he did it in such a concise and fluid way that it made perfect sense.
And we will not be able to do it justice, but we'll give you a couple of them. Like, for instance, on the stone, you don't have to worry about whether you're pushing forward or pulling back. The same thing. Okay, as far as the steel and the stone are concerned, pushing forward and pulling back are the same thing. On the other hand, when you get to your strop, don't cut into the strop.
No.
Always pull away.
Yeah, I mean, well, and the point of a strop does actually produce a bit of a convex,
right?
Because it is actually the leather strop is creating basically a wave underneath the.
Well, not on his, because he uses the steel backed leather.
Well, I think even those are too, because you are compressing the leather to some degree.
Probably very little, but yeah.
It's probably about the same as if you were doing it on wood, because it's not as hard, but it's still pretty. I mean, it's leather. It's very slight. I mean, you wouldn't want it too much, because then it rolls up over the edge. The full idea
is that you're polishing the edge off. So basically, when you're done sharpening a knife, put an edge back on, there's going to be a wire line.
Yeah.
And you'll feel that. Like, it's very subtle. Aaron pointed it out earlier.
I
he had a good comment for it.
When we were leaving, I was like, the wire line was kind of when you truly are right at the point where you're ready to put the final edge on the knife, it's called a wire line, and it's essentially where you pushed up the knife, or you've ground the knife from both sides equally and properly. The thing about a wire line, it's kind of like an orgasm. If you have to ask if you have it, you don't have it. So it's, and that really was the best way to put it, because like I was standing there trying to get it, and I thought I knew how to sharpen knives. But I mean, we're here and we're doing this thing, and he's talking about getting a wire line, and I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe I've got it, maybe I just don't feel it, maybe my hands just aren't sensitive. And then he's like, no, let me show you. He's like, you have a slight one, but you need a full one. Let me show you. And he like does a couple quick swipes and then hands it back to me, and I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's not, there's no mistaking that.
Right. Once you've got it, it's pretty obvious it's there. But it's one of those things where basically the idea is that you're shaving metal off, and you've actually sharpened the knife beyond where it needed to be, which is what you want to do. And then you end up with, it's hard to explain. There's a lot of video on the internet that shows you how to test for it and everything. So definitely look that up. I can't explain it verbally. It's not an easy thing to explain.
No, it really would need to be like,
yeah, you need to watch it or see it. But it's kind of that point you get to before you start the final polishing, and then you polish it, and then you run a strop over it. And I will tell you, when you finished this process, your knife will probably be as sharp as it was from the factory, if not sharper, depending on the knife you got.
Probably sharper, yeah.
Yeah, depending on the knife you got, it could be sharper. And it's a great process. It really does get you to know the knife better. Apparently, the whole story is that a lot of the Japanese knife makers hate this modern day where they have to put edges on knives. Because apparently, when they used to make knives for chefs, specifically sushi chefs, they wouldn't even put an edge on the knife. What they would do is deliver the knife to the chef, and the chef would do the final work to put the edge that he wanted on that knife. And that was they felt that was a way to get closer to the tool, to become kind of one with the overall piece. So the maker the knife maker put his work into it, and the chef puts his work into it. When it's done, it's the chef's tool. So it's an interesting process, and it really does get you to know the tool much better when you take care of it that way.
Oh, absolutely. And I think maybe it's probably a good time to kind of go a little bit into knife anatomy. And this is going to be very generalized. And I think the first thing to understand about this is there's a weird thing when it comes to knives. There are, within the knife world, there are general agreements or a general consensus for the most part of what different blade shapes are named. But even then, there's no definitive, like, this is a whatever, or this is this other thing over here. I think you see it most commonly in when people are talking about a sheep's foot point blade versus I think it's called a Wharncliffe. Mm-hmm. And they're actually, people will often use them interchangeably, and it's pretty acceptable to do that, but they are actually not the same thing when you really look at what a real Wharncliffe is versus what a real sheep's foot is. And even then,
well, they have different purposes behind them too.
Oh yeah, so. Absolutely. And then there's and it's actually very hard to find a true sheep's foot blade or a true Wharncliffe blade, like out in the wild, so to speak, in a knife store, because every knife maker does basically a modification. Even the Benchmade pocket knife that I carry every day that is a sheep's foot blade is a modification. It has a belly on it, and it's really true is not supposed to. And
you could think of all those things as the knife maker putting a little bit of their signature into it too.
Yeah.
And it may or may not meet your need, which is why you kind of have to decide what you want the knife for before you buy it.
Yeah, and I think that's, going back to the tactical, you have to look at, I think, by and large, looking at it from a standpoint of what was this knife designed to do? And usually if it's designed to stab something, it's probably a fighting knife. And the other way to know, because usually like Tonto blades, a lot of the daggers, spear point is pretty much a fighting blade. Now, there is a purpose within bushcraft for spear point because you get a pretty strong tip, but you also get enough of a tip that it's easy to do it makes itself nice for doing fine work with. But another thing to look for or ways to tell that it's actually a fighting knife is if it's got what's called swedges, which is where it's got the back of the knife almost looks like it has an edge, but it's not really. It's beveled, but not to the point of being sharp. And that's meant to make it a little bit easier when stabbing something. Usually if a knife has like handguards, that's a good telltale sign that it's actually a fighting knife, or somebody didn't really know what they were doing when they designed the knife and called it
or they were just making it look tactical.
Or they were just, and I think the listener I was helping make a choice in knives, I didn't, without writing a novel for the guy about why it wasn't a great knife, it was not that it wasn't a great knife, but it wasn't really the knife he thought it was, which was it's a Bear Grylls.
I think Gerber makes
Gerber,
it.
yeah, it's a Gerber knife. And you look at it and you're like, okay, yeah, if I was at the outdoor store and I was just looking for a knife and I thought, oh, Bear Grylls, I guess but and you think about it, Bear Grylls' background is a military background. So when he looks at a knife, he's looking at it from that military standpoint. And that's, when you look at a K-bar, the Marine Corps K-bar, it's a great outdoor knife, but it's really a fighting knife. But it's a decent all-purpose knife, but it is really suited more for fighting because it's got a handguard, it's got a tip that's very centric towards, it's very centric towards stabbing things with. So I think, like, for me personally, I've come to really appreciate the sheep's foot because the sheep's foot is very much a utility knife. Mm-hmm. It's almost a safety tip in that if you're holding the knife and you trip or something, since it doesn't really have a tip per se, you can't stab yourself with it. It's the front end of the knife is basically, and I'm not really going to do this justice, but the front end of the knife is essentially, think of it as being rounded off like the Santoku blade in your kitchen set. And that's basically what a Santoku is.
And the nice part about it also is it's not intimidating. So when people see it, they don't immediately think, oh, that guy's going to go run around pulling a Dexter on people.
So, and I think if people are looking for a good all-purpose hunting knife, any of the drop points are really great for that. They tend to have a nice, good belly on them that really does lend itself to skinning.
Right, and you also have to think about when you say hunting, are you talking about hunting or fishing? Those are different types of knives.
Yeah, exactly.
So take a look at it. Do your internet research. Internet really is a good place to find data on this, but you have to be a little bit more specific about your search. I found that when it comes to knife research on the internet, there's a lot of misinformation, but when you start getting into the specifics, like what's a really good fishing knife, you'll actually find a lot of good information on that specific question. But if you ask what's a good knife, you're not going to find anything. Yeah, I mean, nothing useful, at least.
You're going to find all kinds of crap, and half of it or more is going to be tactical crap.
Right, but it does go back to one of the reasons we're not trying to get into each individual, what's the best fishing, hunting, skinning. It goes back to it's a very personal decision about grip. You can buy a knife off the internet. It does work. You'll see it. You'll get an idea of what it is. But if you do get a chance before you buy it to at least hold one, that's a good idea because the grip is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, the grip, making sure that there's not some very bizarre balance to the knife where the knife is completely balanced. Right. Towards in the tip of the blade or something goofy like that, or to the very back of the handle, and also that the handle feels good and that it's not an odd shape, and that it's not that you don't feel real pressure points in it. Because if you grip a knife and you really feel pressure points within the handle, that's exactly where it's going to rub a blister on your hand when you actually go use it, and that's going to really suck, especially if this is actually a survival knife.
Yep.
And I think to kind of, we've kind of run the gamut today, but I think to talk about a knife from the standpoint of survival for the urban survivalist, or, even somebody that is going to go off into the woods or whatever, it's as far as what is a general purpose good. And I think, honestly, most of the knives that are not tactical knives that are out on the market will do the job and do the job just fine. And I think as far as links go, and maybe it's society as a whole, maybe it's an American thing, I'm not really sure, but we always have the concept of bigger is better. And one of the things I've really learned over the years...
Not always true.
That's not always true, and especially with knives. There is a time and a place for big knives, but most instances, 2 inches, 3 inches... I kind of personally draw the line at about 5.5, and to me, 5.5 inches is just a huge knife.
Right. That's for a fixed woods knife. You know, when you go back to the kitchen knives, different discussions.
That's a completely different discussion.
In those fixed woodland knives, I think a good 3-inch blade. Does most tasks well.
Mm-hmm.
Like Aaron said, you can get up to 5. 5.25.
Yeah, and there's a place for that. I mean, if you're going to be really batoning wood and things like that, which you can do perfectly well with a 3.25 inch blade, which is usually what they end up being, is 3.25 inch, 3.125 to 3.25 inches. But those are perfect for most outdoor tasks. They're small enough that you can still use them, and they don't become anything over that. It really does, without skill, start to become unwieldy. And that's something I noticed, and then I started to notice that like the much older bushcraft guys tend to say anything over that, and they usually will say anything over that's a Rambo knife. But I think by and large that's true. You don't need 6 inches is okay. I mean, if you like it, then that's fine. And
if you're comfortable with it, go do what you want to do.
Right.
But again, this goes back to comfort levels and what most people are going to be comfortable carrying. As we're talking about this, another question that people always end up asking, or like if I talk to somebody about knives, is, all right, I saw ATS-34, or VG-10, or S-30, or SV-30. There's a million letter combinations out there. The key here is there's 2 major types of steel. I mean, for all intents and purposes, there's carbon steel, which is basically iron and 1% carbon, and that gives you steel. And then there's stainless steel, which is the same ingredients plus chromium, right?
Yeah, it's chromium.
Yeah. Losing it today. We've been talking for a while now. So then you get stainless steel. And now, once you get into those, there's a ton of different variations. At the end of the day, if you're going through a decent maker, and I mean, when I say decent, any decent manufacturer or custom maker, doesn't matter, you are going to end up with a good steel. It's not going to be garbage. If you go to the local garbage mart somewhere, whatever little flea market, and buy some knife there, well, then I'm not going to tell you what you're going to get, because that's a gamble.
Yeah, who knows?
But for all I know, you're getting iron with nothing in it.
Uranium.
Who knows?
No, wait. That was from Mexico.
Okay.
That happened.
But on the other hand, if you go through any of the decent makers, you're going to end up with a good steel. I wouldn't worry too much about whether it's ATS-34 or SV-30 or, I can't remember what the big one was for a long time.
Or any of the A2 or any
the
D2.
Right, and then if you get to the carbon steels, there's the A2 and the D2. Basically, they often get referred to as tool steels. I think there's also 5112.
Oh, there's 154 CMP.
Oh, yeah. There's a ton of tool steels.
On.
Sometimes they use ball bearing steels. I mean, there's a ton of them out there. If you start getting too wrapped up in that, then either you must be far more knowledgeable about this stuff than you're either letting on or we are, or you're really getting caught up in the wrong things. Because at the end of the day, any of the good steels, carbon or stainless. Now, of course, carbon steel, is more prone to rust. You have to care for it a little bit more. Stainless steel is going to hold up a little bit better for a survival knife in bad conditions. But again, going back to that Puko discussion, I would get a carbon steel Puko. Yeah. That's how I would do it.
Well, and I think there's a trade-off. No matter what steel, there's, and it goes back to there's no perfect knife.
Yep.
There's no perfect knife material. There's no, each steel and variant thereof has its advantages and disadvantages. I think SV-30 is a great example. Yep. It'll hold its edge like a mofo, but
when it loses
its edge and you're out in the wilderness, good luck putting an edge back on that sucker.
That's 2 hours of your time gone.
But I think that's probably one of the most important things to look at when you're looking at knives. And anybody that's really been with and worked with knives for a long time is edge retention is a great thing, but if the edge, if the material and the edge on that knife is so hard that you can't easily put an edge back on it,
right,
then
it's not useful.
Then it's not useful. And I've a lot of guys like custom knife makers I've talked to and read about and looked into have all said that they would rather have a knife that didn't hold its edge as well, but was easier to sharpen.
And actually, there's been a big resurgence in the custom knife world of carbon steels just because of that. They're easier to sharpen, and they can be made sharper. So that's something to consider when you're thinking about it. We're going to get an email on this, so I'm going to answer the question now. What about ceramic? Ceramic is a very interesting material, and it makes for an interesting but not great kitchen knife, but interesting. It can be made relatively sharp. They can be cleaned very easily, and they're rather antibacterial. They don't hold certain things. They don't hold odors, whatever. All that's fantastic.
Do you have a stinky knife, Jonathan?
I do not have a stinky knife.
Oh, okay.
Those are all the things the ceramic knife guys say.
Oh, okay.
And so that's great. First time you drop a ceramic knife and it shatters into 15 different pieces, you're going to be wishing you had a steel knife. So when we're talking about prep and survival and all that, you can do whatever you want for your kitchen knives. I use steel. Do whatever you want. But as far as prep and survival knives go, I will tell you, or pocket knives even. You know, there was a big trend in ceramic pocket knives for a while too, because people thought it was cool. Well, I'm going to go and tell you right now, don't worry about what's cool. Use what's functional. You will drop a pocket knife. It's going to happen. And the first time you do and your $300 ceramic knife shatters, you're going to be really annoyed. And it all of a sudden becomes a useless material. It's not useful when it's a handle and a shattered knife. So steel is the way to go. Steel's been around a very long time, and it's still the best option.
Yeah, you can get into, I mean, even besides ceramic, you can get into all, I mean, my brother has a carbon fiber titanium laminate blade, and it's really neat, but he can't sharpen it. I can't sharpen it. I mean, you actually do have to take that knife back to the manufacturer to sharpen it.
Right. So go with steel. It's been around for thousands of years, and it's worked well for human beings for a long time.
It's worked well so far, so stick with what's worked.
And like I said, you can use one of the high-tech steels. That's fine. Just know what the trade-offs are. And you can do again, that's a Google thing. You want to get onto Google and start looking up what the trade-offs between ATS 34 and, whatever other ones out there. And there are so many letter number combinations, it's not even worth it. But if you want to start comparing, go for it. I'm not going to tell you not to. I just think that's the last thing you start worrying about.
Yeah, I mean, if you're worrying about stuff like that, I mean, truly worrying about it, and truly, then that's beyond the scope of this show to begin with.
Exactly.
Because this show is really meant to be kind of a general conversation about knives and why knives are an important tool.
I can guarantee you we will talk about knives again, because I think both of us agree it's the second most important tool you will ever have with you. The first one always being you.
Absolutely. And with that, we wrap up episode 47. Thank you for joining us. If you liked the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. And if you didn't, well, why not tell us about it using the contact form on the site? Seriously, the show's for you, the listener. And if you have something to say, we're listening. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Urban Survival Forum through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. By connecting with us, you'll receive updates about the site, notifications of new articles, and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each episode, where we invite you to comment on the show, interact with us, interact with each other, and let the world know what you're thinking. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.